I was inducted into the Internet Hall of Fame, most likely from the work that I did in the late 80s and early 90s in building a state-of-the-art network called SurfNet, spelled C-E-R-F-N-E-T, like BitSurf. And we built this regional network in Southern California using technology that nobody else had even thought about, and built it to be a commercial network right from the get-go, which was kind of heretical back in the day, because at that time around 1987, 1988, these networks were primarily used for government and academic use. But we had a lot of customers who were interested in being part of our network, so when we founded it, we started right away with working with the academics and saying we're going to build a network that everybody can use because it's really important. As a result of that, and understanding with all of the team players that we had at the time, we were able to build a network that was profitable right from the start. We had those big, fast 56 kilobit per second circuits and T1s, which were 1.5 megabit circuits that we put in. The vendors all thought we were nuts because it was such huge capacity at the time that nobody had that much data. But we were really successful. We worked with Cisco Systems, which at the time was a little dinky startup in the Bay Area. Our first order with them was so large they didn't know how to process it. It was 10% of their gross revenue for the year in 1988. One of our first commercial customers was a little tiny startup called Qualcomm, and they were one of our early adopters at the beginning of the network as well. So, you can kind of look back at the history and see how dramatic the internet was and to these kinds of companies. And when you look at Cisco and their blocks of buildings in the Silicon Valley now, it's kind of astonishing after visiting them with their fold-up tables and building boxes, a few geeks building boxes in a garage in the Bay Area. We also worked with two of our competitors, PSINet and UUNet at the time in the early 90s, because we really, all three of us were running networks that had commercial traffic on them, but we had a hard time moving that traffic between networks because the interconnections between the networks were all riding on either the federal government networks or the National Science Foundation network. So we decided that we were going to all interconnect independently of that, and we created something called the Commercial Internet Exchange, which was the first time that true, real commercial traffic crossed the internet, which, when you look back at that, seems so logical to do that, but at the time it was we were kind of considered anarchists. So it was quite an adventure. And a lot of those kinds of things were really important. But at the same time, I had a staff which was sort of comprised of a fair amount of women, which was unusual at the time. And so we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get people to use the internet, because it was very, this was before the internet, anybody knew what it was. But we realized that there was a ton of power there. So we actually developed a cartoon character called Captain Internet, who was a female superhero, and her sidekick was Surf Boy, and did a series of comic books to humanize the internet and make it easier for people to deal with. We worked with teachers to develop curriculum in the early 90s so that K through 12 school teachers could actually adopt internet technology and bring it into the classroom, which was very forward-thinking. So it was a lot of fun. We enjoyed ourselves quite a bit.